I'm going to jump right in, share my screen. We'll do the recording. We can be on and off and not too much time, but I'm just going to run through. My goal today was to run through what I do every year right after the 4th of July for our business planning. I remember, Ray, three of us on the call have a voluntary benefits background where you had to put together your business plan and everyone's give it to the upline, to the upline, to the upline, to the upline. And then before, whoever's at the top of the pyramid, it looks like they're going to grow $80 billion that year. and then
if only.
Yeah. And then you get to this time of year and it's like, well, we've done $500 million. So that's where it is right now. And I always wanted the business plan to actually be a real plan. And I did a bunch of fake ones, surely back in the day, but now I really use it as a real plan. So when I get to this time of the year, I'm looking at it and saying, how do I know who's real, who's not? Because I think one of the things that we tend to do is we're good at selling ourselves. We're salespeople. So I talked to all these. In fact, I had a call, and when he watches the recording, he'll know I'm talking about him. But he'll remain nameless, and it's not a negative comment. But he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. My pipeline is so full. Raise your hand if you ever heard somebody say that. And I kind of chuckled. So I'm like, So you're thinking maybe I should slow down a little bit because I've got so much going on. I should pause. Marketing efforts, whatever. And whether you're working with us or not, I've had the conversation with plenty of people over the years and lived through it myself where I actually did press pause. And because I was looking at my pipeline, I'm like, I have too much going on. If all of this comes through, there's no way I could handle it. And the reality is I've never, ever seen it where all of it comes through.
Right.
That's not how the world works. And you think about our business, sometimes I think, man, wouldn't it be great if I was in a more transactional, bang, 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 make the sale and you're done type of a business, in at least the sense that you'd know what your pipeline was more so. There's just so many variables in this. Even I think real estate agents suffer from the same thing where you have a buyer that's hot, you have a seller that's hot, and there's termites and the deal's done. You have a buyer that's hot, a seller that's hot, and then the financing falls through, or interest rates go through the roof like they have recently, or fill in the blank. There's all these variables that are out of your control that can impact the outcome of a deal. And so then if you look at them and you say, okay, first off, what the hell is my real pipeline? I don't think most people know what their real pipeline is. And then the second one is, of my real pipeline, what should I build a plan around? And that's second week of July. Each year, that's the process that I'm going through. And so this is kind of just some random thoughts thrown on a board, but then some steps I go through too. So don't be surprised every year. Oh, that's my reminder to say, yeah, hold rates are not as good right now. So the summer hold rates, Mike, you want to talk to that at all? What you're seeing more broadly? I already said they tend to suck for 6 weeks or so as the summer gets started. But
I mean, it's not across the board, but in most of our agencies, we're seeing that they're not sticking as high. And we've seen this for 3 years in a row, Paul. And as you said it too, even before we were doing this, when we were calling for ourselves, as high as our own individual call rates were when we were making calls, they still went down in the summer. And it sucks. We just got to be on top of all the reminders, get who we can on, and then make sure that we're on top of the resets. We did hire someone else to help make resets that started last week. His name's Rick Stinson. So you're probably going to see some emails come through from him, just so you can recognize his name. Anyway, he is working specifically on resets for us. And then his help should, we've also hired 2 or 3 other callers. I've got a couple agencies, Ray, yours is one of them, to where, we've just, let's get more appointments than the agreed to amount, and the hold rate's a little low. We don't mind doing that kind of stuff, just fill the pipeline a little bit stronger to try and help make up for some of that kind of stuff. And then usually we get through it. come around, the middle August, September, everybody's, kids are back in school and people have relaxed back into their positions. But this is nothing new for us. We don't like it any more than anyone else does. But the hold rates just go down when the kids get out of school and the vacations start. I know we've even got some of our own callers that are on vacation right now. We actually had one of them in a car accident over the weekend in ICU. Good news is he's out of ICU and doing okay. I think he's flying back home tomorrow. But yeah, the summer hold rates can be a little bit tougher. It's frustrating for all of us, I think.
Yeah. The other thing about it that I've seen is it works both ways. I think a lot of us aren't real with what our actual pipeline is. And I'll go through in a second kind of what I do to flush that out. But I also get some surprises because I'll get people that I thought were maybe out of the pipeline who really were just unplugged. And then they show back up in the pipeline. So it can work both ways. I think you just have to work a little harder to figure out which side of the fence are they falling on. So hot prospects don't all close. We talked about that one. What's
One
your
of
real
the other
pipeline?
things,
Yeah.
Paul, real quick, one of the other things that I talked to our callers about this morning, and I mean, I don't know how often you did this, but I did it on just about every call. I would end the call with something like this: Ray, I appreciate your time. I know how important it is. Thank you for giving us 20 minutes. Just so you know, your schedule is important to us. We'll make sure we call you if something needs to change to reschedule. We would really appreciate it if you did the same thing for us, because if we don't hear from you, we're going to assume you're going to be on that call. And if you're not, we've wasted our time as well. Look forward to talking to you again. You'll get a confirmation. So something like that with every appointment I ever set, really. And it helped. I mean, Paul knows, I set hundreds of appointments for him, and without resetting meetings, my stick rate was 70%. And I think that's one of the reasons why. There's nothing the matter with that. You're not being rude, you're being just direct. Look, I know your time's important. Thanks for giving it to us. So is ours. Let's please make sure there's a courtesy email or phone call if one of us can't make it. We'll be doing confirmation reminders a couple of days before the appointment. If you're not on, if you don't respond, we're going to be on that call waiting for you. So please show up. Again, just another way to put it. But I'm just going to make sure our callers are doing something like that as they set their appointments as well.
Yeah, it's a good practice, especially this time of year. Okay, what do you really have? Cleaning up the pipeline. This is what I go through. To me, part of it starts with the close at the end of the first meeting. I've sat in on a ton of meetings with people in the last few years and gotten it's been a great experience. What I've seen is there's a lot of us out there that we really don't want to get a no. And so we'll softly close. So then you're starting your pipeline out with uncertainty in my view, because if you don't allow the prospect to give you an answer at the end of the meeting, you don't have an answer. Now you have to chase them for the answer. And I've done it long enough now. My favorite answer, like anybody else, is yes. But my second favorite answer is no, not I don't know. So give them a shot to say no. And what I've seen is you get to that end of the meeting, and a lot of us will, instead of asking a question and shutting the hell up so they can actually answer the question, we'll ask the question and then roll right into a softer exit. It'll look something like this. We could do this for you. And actually, if you'd like, I can just send you an email with the kind of stuff we need, and then I'll follow up with you in a week. I mean, that's not a close. That's a non-close, really. But it's a very common outcome at the end of these meetings. People have shared a ton of recordings with me, and I'm looking at it, and at the end, there it happens. They offer to send an email instead of letting the prospect answer a question. I mean, my close is pretty soft. All I say is, I'm going to stop talking and give you a chance to ask any questions you have and see where you'd like to go from here. And then I shut up. And they tell me where they want to go from here. It's pretty, and it usually goes one of a few ways. We need to get this in front of some other people in the organization, in which case I'm going to book it and do it with them because I don't trust them to try and sell for me, which is a shift from years ago when we were in person, when I would try more aggressively to keep HR out. It's either going to go there. It's going to go, I want to go to the next step. What do I need to get you? Or some other version of this ain't happening. And and the thing I've realized is people don't like saying no. Just people are generally trying to be polite. They're not being trying to be dishonest. They just don't really like saying no. So if they say, well, I got to think about this. I got to have an internal conversation. These are all soft no's oftentimes if they won't agree to a future action. And to me, that's the next thing is I got to get them to show me rather than, I coach soccer for these little kids and I'm teaching them, they can't help but go where their stomach is pointing. That's just the way it is. Nobody can cook that way and they're facing this way. It doesn't work. So don't get head faked. And if they say, oh, I got to do this, I'm going to move to schedule a check-in call. Okay, what's the time frame for that? Hey, I had a guy that said recently, I've got to get it in front of the executive committee. And that was where it was going to end. My natural next question is, hey, I'll check in with you if I haven't heard back from you after that. When will that be? Completely fair question. He said, I have a meeting this coming Tuesday. I said, great. Let me know how it goes. If I don't hear from you, I'll call you later that week. So now we have a verbal agreement for this to continue. That's a clean, at least step forward. And it gave me the feeling, okay, this is not a stall. He's not putting me off. It's a step he has to go through, whatever. So I think that's part of it is closing. If you're not closing, you got to start closing. And that's not offering to send an email. In my sales process, we don't quote things without getting a check. We do the whole consulting approach, and that a lot of the folks in this group do. Some do, some don't. But whatever it is, they need to show some form of buy-in. And before I did the consulting, I realized the more I asked for, that they actually responded and gave me, that was also a sign of buy-in. So maybe you don't like the consulting approach. That's not your thing. There's a big difference between someone saying, yeah, you can quote my stuff on the one hand, and on the other hand, opening up everything to you. That's a lot larger buy-in. And sharing with you what the decision-making process is going to be, who all the players are going to be, You can still nail it down tighter or not as tightly. And then I follow up until I get a yes or no. And most people don't like saying no, so they're going to give you a lot of soft no's. At this time of year, and always, all throughout the year, if I've followed up 6 times, they're getting not necessarily a breakup email, but my message is going to be a little more pointed in the email. And whatever I say, it's going to be closed out by saying, either way, thanks for letting me know. And I found that finish to my emails, I get a much higher response rate. And then they'll come clean, is what I call it. But they're going to come clean and say, hey, haven't forgot about it, want to do it. I got a project that I've got to wrap up. I'm not going to do it. We've got other priorities. Let's reconnect on this next year. Whatever the outcome is, I just don't need 6 pages of follow-up calls that I've got to do every week in my CRM when only 2 of them are actually legitimate, right? So what do I do next? I make conservative projections. I only assume in my projections, I have a goal this year. My goal is to add $1 million in new revenue. And we are on track for that. And I have a goal, or when I look at the remainder of the year, here we are halfway through it. I don't expect to have half the revenue booked at this point. If I have 40% of the revenue booked, I'm pretty confident that things are on track. And then I look at the balance and I look at my prospect list that I've now gone through and cleaned up and I say, okay, how many of these are in what I would consider strong prospect category? That would be they're cutting a check, or we have an agreement at a future date to kick off a project. Those are my strong ones. Or we've done a project and the outcome was, this is good, let's reconnect, but we're not going to make a change mid-year. Let's table this and we will start implementation in September, something like that. Those are strong prospects, right? And because of our conversation earlier, where there are so many variables out of my control, every year I watch some of those strong prospects leave the company and get replaced. I mean, I can rattle off the reasons, but some of them disappear. I know that I'm going to lose some. So I only build my revenue projections around 1 out of 3 of those happening. And I also know I will get some late in the year surprises. Every year we have people pretty late into the year that pop up that are still fairly sizable that make a change. They're just that rare prospect that's ready to make a change, and our timing was great and all of that. I don't consider that predictable organic growth. That's good fortune. I don't build a plan around it. The other part is we always, every year, we get somebody in the first quarter that just renewed that says, that sucked. I'm irritated enough. I'll change right now. We'll do this whole thing again. Or if financially it's urgent enough, we'll do this whole thing again. Also, not predictable organic growth. I don't build my plan around it. And then I look at our average closing cycle. So now I know what my deficit is. And I'll say, okay, my average account that we're closing, if it's that 150 life account, which is an average, not just for us actually, but across a bunch of these campaigns, I know what the closing cycle is on those, 6 to 9 months for the typical cycle. And I also know if I go down market, I can cut that down pretty good. And then I have to start making some decisions. Do I want to maybe add some of those in, some 50 life groups, so that I can hit my revenue target for the year, knowing that it's going to take 3 of those to maybe compensate for 1 that I'm short of on the other side. And then I have more time to get it done. And they're easier to set meetings with, and I can, so on. So that's the calculation I'm making every year at this time of year. And if you go through that and you do that exercise and you say, okay, it looks like I'm gonna be $100,000 short, and I need to add in, I need to recalibrate or make some adjustments, then let's add in some small prospects and knock down 3 of those. I know this is, you know, I'm probably speaking heresy to some folks. There's like, I never work with anything below X, or I never do Y. I've never had hard and fast rules like that. I was attached to revenue. So we tend to hit our targets. And I'm willing to adjust. My ego is not so big I can't make adjustments. And I'm not too proud to get $30,000 of revenue at a hit if I need to do it. So I'm on track this year, but there have been years that we weren't at this point. I added in smaller prospects. I made some other adjustments. The other thing I've realized in this whole new normal that we're in is that we can do a lot more volume of appointments, a lot more conveniently, and we close a smaller percentage. There's a smaller conversion rate because there's less connection created. We're talking like this on a computer screen. We're not in their office. That can be an obstacle. So if I'm going to go back in and add in smaller prospects, I'm probably going to look at putting them in a tighter radius where I can go set aside a morning and an afternoon each week where I can go knock down some in-person meetings for those that are open to it. Or I'm going to start doing in-person meetings for my second meeting. Now, for a big prospect, I'll jump on a plane to do that. But that makes a difference. Then I'm going to look at niches that we have. We've got a couple areas where we've just by chance, wasn't even intentional, but we do well with small hospitals. We do well with car dealerships. And does it matter to them? Does it really matter that we have some? From a management of healthcare standpoint, it makes no difference, but from confidence of the prospect, it can make a difference. And the confidence of the prospect can decrease your closing cycle time. So then I can pull some smaller prospects in those niches that are geographically reachable. Now I've got another accelerator. And if I have centers of influence or referrals, something that historically we've not been good at, I'm talking about me personally, and I think it probably applies to the industry for a lot of folks anyway, is working centers of influence and referrals. And so that is a way to accelerate as well. Can you get some of those? When was the last time you asked for one? When should you ask for one? I realized I did better asking for referrals in the honeymoon phase of an account than I did after, the CEO's wife didn't have her card on time or some stupid thing happened, or at the renewal after a great year. So that we've built that into our process. And 3-to-1 revenue replacement, that's been my kind of magic thing. My magic number was, okay, I'm going to go after a third of the revenue per account versus whatever my target revenue per account was, because they're going to be significantly quicker to close, easier to get, that kind of thing. So Scott, you're able to join us today. I'm going to open it up to you so you can share some thoughts and insights on some of that as well.
Well, I mean, I've been taking notes just along with everybody else, Paul. That's really good stuff. I appreciate it. Just two reiterations and then a couple of notes, a couple of just tactical things. The reiteration is what you said at the beginning, which is, and you kind of walk through how to do that calculation, how to do that analysis, but making sure that your pipeline is real. And sometimes that's easier said than done, but I mean, you were very clear in terms of your criteria and conditions of how you define what is real in the pipeline. But as entrepreneurs and as business leaders, in my world as an advisor and consultant, I'm working with the same types of organizations and decision makers that you guys are. It is important to look at the pipeline, and it's fair to put on rose-colored glasses for a few seconds and to add it all up and see that big pile of cash at the end of the year. But then, take those off and look through actual lenses and understand what your closing rate is, understand what your sales cycle is, exactly like you just went through, and then do the new calculation and see where you are related to your goals. If you're coming up short, you gave some tactics there, and I've got a couple of things I want to tag onto that. If you're where you need to be, then kudos, pat yourself on the back, but don't slow down. I mean, I've fallen into this trap where I may be running ahead of a particular objective or goal early in the year or whatever time frame I'm managing it by, and I'll let my foot off the gas. I'll go play a little bit more, and that's fine. It's fine to celebrate those things and take advantage of that. But when I let my foot off the gas too much, call it providence, call it the universe, whatever you want to call it, I find that my pipeline unravels faster. So when you do good things happen, but the good things you do don't necessarily directly impact the good things that happen. That's my experience. It may not be yours, but I find that when I'm actively doing what I need to be doing from a prospecting and marketing and pipeline management standpoint, those experiences that you were talking about that are one-offs that you don't build your plan around, 100% agree. But I find that when I'm doing the right things, they tend to happen more often. And when I'm not doing the right things, they rarely happen. So yep. maybe that's confirmation bias, but whatever it is, it tends to be real in my own head. So all that to say, the takeaway is keep doing the right things, even when you're running ahead. And when you're running behind, the other thing I'll mention is the urgency and the motivation better be there, but don't panic. Don't get into helter-skelter mode. Don't start doing things the wrong way in a crazy way just because there's extra pressure and urgency. I'd rather be slow and steady and win the race, or come up just a hair short, no pun intended, come up just a hair short, as opposed to feeling extra stress, pressure, and panicking and doing things badly. Because then you probably aren't even going to finish the race at all, at least not in an effective way. So there's a couple strategic notes, tactical notes. One thing that has been very, very valuable to me that I share with my clients a lot, it's one of the key metrics that we measure. And this is going to vary from person to person. So there's not a blanket number here, but it's the value of your appointment, calculating the value of your appointment. And you can get complex in terms of how that metric is calculated, but the simplest way to do it is take your conversion rate and multiply it by average annual transaction size. So let's say it's a 30 life case that's worth $20,000 a year. I'm pulling a number. I don't know if that's legit or not, but let's say it's $20,000 case, and your closing ratio for that size company is 30%. So 30% times $20,000, let's make it 21,000 to keep the math easy, $7,000. That's the value of a meaningful appointment. And define appointment how you want. I define appointment as moving through that sales process. I think you described them as hot prospects or strong opportunities, right? So it's not someone you're just meeting. It's also not someone who is asking for the paperwork, right? They're kind of in that sweet spot middle section. So they get through and into the meaningful conversation phase. They're into meaningful conversation. And at that point, you can do that calculus. What's your conversion rate? What's the average transaction size on an annual basis? You could, again, we can complicate this and do it. How long do you keep your clients? How many years? And no, just do it on an annual basis. And so now you might have a $2, a $3, a $7, a $10,000 value of that meaningful conversation, of that appointment. And now you can look in your pipeline, see how many of those relationships exist. And that becomes another way to get at what is the actual valuation of your pipeline. What's the actual analysis of your pipeline in a reasonably objective way. And that value of the appointment, that's real money. You haven't deposited it yet. But if the metrics hold, if you're measuring what you're doing and you continue to hold what you're doing, the transaction size as you expect it to be, and the conversion rate as you expect it to be, that number is that number. It's an objective reality in terms of your measurement. So using that value of appointment to calculate the value of your pipeline can give you a really good indication of where you're going to be in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, a year, et cetera. The other note that I wanted to give is a business coach that I work with. I am his client. Certainly in the world of benefits and healthcare, what I'm about to suggest is harder from a marketing and sales standpoint. But I think it has a lot of relevancy and a lot of utility from an agency management standpoint. So what my coach teaches me and the other folks that he works with is to think about your metrics on an ongoing 12-month rolling basis. Now, again, I'm not talking about marketing and sales cycles. I'm not talking about, we know what Q3 is, we know what Q4 is, we know what Q1 is and Q2 is in the standpoint of how we need to go to market. I'm not talking about that. But in the standpoint of a rolling 12-month calendar, if you look at your pipeline and you know that in the next 12 months, you want to add $1 million, Paul, right? Yes, by the end of 23, you want to be $1 million more than you were in 22. Yes, we know that. But what if every 12 months was $1 million goal? Maybe it doesn't need to be. But if it was, now you can look at your goal on a rolling 12-month basis, and you can always measure your pipeline for the next 12 months out to see how you're going to be stacking up on a rolling 12-month basis. That's not going to work for everybody, but it is an interesting way to think about managing your firm and managing your growth and managing your pipeline from, that revenue analysis consideration, doing it on a 12-month rolling basis. Last note, and you mentioned it too, and I see the same thing across the industry as well in the clients that I work with, in particular in the benefit space, related to COIs and referrals. So, and this is going to be, old. If any of you have heard me speak before, you've probably heard me say this, but introductions always over referrals, right? Closed-ended introductions as opposed to open-ended referrals. So it's not handing out business cards and saying, if you know somebody, and Paul, I've heard you teach the same point. You want to find who you want to know, who you want the introduction to, and find your conduit, find your pathway, your connection pathway to that person, and ask for the introduction to Ray Kober, ask for the introduction to Paul Siegert, that specific name. You want to ask for the introduction to that specific name. If you ask for introductions to specific names of people who know that person, you will likely get the introduction to that specific person. And so then the question is, how do you identify those people? How do you identify the connection points? LinkedIn is like an oracle in that sense. There's other ways to do it. You all are involved and you have your own networks. You probably attend different types of community events, maybe your church, maybe civic groups you belong to, chambers of commerce. There's all kinds of different connection points where you could identify a path to someone who serves on a board or as a chairman or as a CEO or as a CFO. But LinkedIn is as good as any in terms of doing that initial research and finding that connection path. All that to say, I encourage setting a benchmark around any of your marketing strategies. But COIs and introductions is one that is pretty straightforward to set a benchmark around. And so, ask for introductions at least twice a month of existing clients, of influencers, of colleagues, of friends. Find someone in your prospect world or in your network that you would want to work with, and do your best to identify that person. If you can't find a direct path, Paul, you mentioned car dealerships earlier. So, let's say you're working with Bill Wilson, the Ford dealer of the Midwest. Bill Wilson's probably going to know the Ford dealer of the Northeast. And so I'm thinking about this on a national basis, but you could do this in your own regional geography too. Bill doesn't necessarily need to personally know Mark Johnson, who is the Northeast guy, because their reputations, they're going to know each other. They're going to know of each other. So if you can just ask Bill Wilson to reach out to Mark Johnson, he's going to have his contact information. He's going to be probably willing to make the introduction, even if they don't already know each other. So when you're working within a niche, you can exploit the relationships and the awareness of one person's, awareness of their counterpart in the same type of business really easily, and get new introductions that way. So some of you probably already doing this or applying this strategy, but this idea of consistently asking for introductions and setting a benchmark to it, whether it's once a month or twice a month or whatever it is a fantastic practice. The other thing is, who says you only have to ask one person for one name, for an introduction to one name? You can ask one person to introduce you to 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people at a time. Probably no more than 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. But you can have multiple people on that list. They may not be comfortable introducing you to all of them, but there's probably going to be at least 1 and likely 2 or 3 on that list that they are. So this is and as we all know, a friend of mine always said that word of mouth marketing is the best type of marketing that money cannot buy, in the strictest sense of it. So asking for introductions, specific introduction, is, I think, one of the most underutilized, to your point, Paul, and not necessarily ignored or overlooked, just underutilized strategies that we can use to keep our pipelines full. So just a few notes, just highlighting and supplementing to everything you just said, Paul. But I do agree that summertime is an ideal time to take stock of the pipeline, make sure it's real, and then get yourself in shape to hit your goal for end of year.
Yeah, a couple of the closing thoughts that I had, and see what questions people might have or other thoughts. The Q2 check-ins, right now we're rolling into being 6 weeks or so past the close of Q2. And those check-ins are a great opportunity to ask, because, and I know people are like, well, their plan's running hot, or it's not going great, or it's going great. Having observed a bunch of these plans that aren't doing well are, I think, in many cases, could be the best example of why they should do things the way we do things. I've got examples of groups that had, they got murdered, and they still, because of all the stuff that we do, had a single-digit increase overall to the cost of their plan. And and they know, hey, if I was in this retail level funded product or a fully insured product, I would have just gotten my tail handed to me. So I don't think it's a reason not to ask. If they're unhappy, maybe that's a reason not to ask. But if they're running hot, I think if you educate them right, that's still a time of why that still reinforces what we're doing. The other thing you said that made me think of something was, don't panic. I look at it this way, that I am not going to stop everything I'm doing and constantly change directions. That's not what I'm talking about. Could I add in? Can I adjust my plan, add in something over here? Okay, we're going to pursue this. We're going to add in 100 accounts that fit this profile that we believe we can close more quickly, and then continue to pursue these, because that's my long-term plan. So my short-term adjustments aren't going to trump the long-term planning. And I also know the marketing that I do between now and the end of the year, some of that can bear fruit this year, but it's very important for next year. Knowing my closing cycles, I'm going to have lots of conversations in the next 6 months that are 2024 closed accounts. So I can't afford to stop now on that front, or I'm making a short-term decision that has long-term negative impacts, which I don't want to do. So the other thing is, I'm going to go back 12 to 18 months. I'm going to look at all my prospects, the good, the bad, the ugly, and I'm going to reach out to them by phone. Email is so easy to ignore. Phone, in person, most difficult to ignore. Phone, second. Text, third. Email, text or email, whatever, third. So I want to get as close as I can efficiently to the prospect, I mean, in an emotional sense, where it requires response or I get a response. And I know a lot can happen in 12 months. A lot can happen in 18 months. People leave. The economy's definitely in a transition right now. Some industries are doing better. Some industries are doing worse. And so I'm going to go back and reach out to them and say, hey, we had a good conversation. I don't even go into all the details. My scripting is, I mean, I've been doing it lately, so it's kind of top of mind. I've got my CRM open and I'm dialing whoever his name is. We'll call him Bill Smith. Hey, Bill, Paul Siegert, we had a good conversation about lowering the cost of healthcare last February. Our timing wasn't good. You had other priorities that were trumping it or make it more important than addressing it then. You popped up on my list of check-ins today. I wanted to see if now would be a better time to dig into that conversation. And I get yeses off of that call list. And I revive some. So in fact, Tony's on here. He revived 2 that are converting right now that were old. He did this very exercise and he revived 2 that a lot of us wouldn't have gone back for that are now becoming new clients. And it was really going back and chasing those or just giving them another shot. Say, hey, have things changed or not, and get an answer on that. But if you do that verbally by phone, you're going to get some results from that, and you'll revive a couple very likely that you had talked to that were even firm no's. I'm still going back. If it wasn't, don't ever call me again, which with my style, I don't get that, generally speaking. I leave it positive, whatever. Timing's off, that's okay. But unless they say, don't call me again, then I feel it's left open and it's okay to do a check-in and see how things are going. So anybody else have thoughts, input, questions? Tony, you're driving, but if you want to speak to the examples, feel free.
I'll just jump in with one quick thing that's not directly associated with what we've been talking about, Paul, but I just have to give you major kudos. And I hope that everybody who's on and who is on live and then watching the recording takes advantage. Paul was just part of one of our collaborative books we just put out called Benefits Revolution. He is anchoring the book. I did that on purpose, Paul. Primacy and recency is important in a good book, so I needed to lock in the last chapter of the book with something really strong. So for those of you out there who don't have a copy of Benefits Revolution, request it from Paul or go on Amazon and get a copy. The book turned out really, really well. Written for advisors, by the way. This is the one that we did, written and targeting advisors to help them grow their practices, grow their firms, also make them aware of some different solution providers out there. So a little bit different take on our normal collaborative book model, but just a huge kudos to Paul. It's a fantastic contribution to the book, Paul. Glad to have you as a part of it. And Benefits Revolution is doing well. So it already went to Amazon bestseller and hung out there for a little while last week after we released it, and hit #1 in 3 categories. So again, if you all don't have a copy yet, pick it up. Benefits Revolution on Amazon from Paul Siegert.
Yeah, and give it 6 stars and tell everyone it's awesome.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
Help the guy out.
The content is really good. So thank you, Paul.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Yep.
This is Tony. So yeah, one thing I wanted to mention that I think can be helpful to people too, as you're doing that follow-up, is if you're using some form of CRM that shows that they're opening emails, because that's enough to keep you, give you a glimmer of hope too. Because there's people out there that, for whatever reason, phone calls and emails, are not responding. Yet if they're still answering that email or looking at it, they know who you are, because you've been so pointed at trying to get a hold of them. And those are people that I wouldn't suggest, dumping out just because they're not answering. So, we use HubSpot, and that works really well to identify those that are still staying engaged. And then another guy I resurrected was from that corny video that I make and send out on why you originally agreed to meet, and we're trying to get, and the guy, answered back on that one. So you got to use different formats, not just emails, voicemails, but continue to go after them.
What's the video thing? I kind of have an idea because you shared it with me, but it might help some of the
Yeah,
other
well,
folks.
Loom Video. I'm in the process of making some new ones, but it's a platform you can buy, and it has, you can make videos to send to people and say, hey, please watch this real quick video, and you can make big bold letters and point to it in the email, and I make reference to it in my voicemails that I leave them too. Say, hey, I'm going to shoot you a quick video as a reminder of why I'm calling you. And it's a 45-second video on the value of what we do. And this is your second biggest expense type of thing. I'm just looking for 20 minutes kind of thing. And I've gotten responses out of it, and I see people watching it too. So that's just another tool in our toolbox that works real well, Loom.
Yeah, I think it's great, especially with the transition away from in-person meetings, to bring back some kind of that adds some personalization to it.
Yeah, and it's easy to make them, so you can make 2 or 3 of them and keep them in the pipeline. So it's first I didn't know if it would work, but it has actually worked. So I'm like, what the hell? Let's keep going at it,
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. So you mentioned 150 lives is the average deal size. What do you say revenue is for a group that size?
100 grand.
100 grand?
Yeah.
Okay, on 150
For
lives.
us, it's about 100. Yeah.
Okay. So that's more than $50 per employee per month, right? That'd be 72 grand.
Yeah, 50.
What are you doing?
It ends up being about 7,500 a lot, and then times 12 is like 90,000. And yeah, and some ancillary and the other stuff that we tend to install, and then they get to about 100,000.
Got it. And then in terms of the follow-up, so you mentioned that you're following up, and that communication, it sounds like, was mostly email. What's your mix? Are you calling during the follow-up period? And one of the areas that we struggle with is they agree to give us data and then they ghost us.
Yeah.
And so we've had so many deals fall apart where we get them all hot and bothered, they're ready to go, they commit to giving us data, and then they fall off the map. So I don't know if you've encountered that at all.
Yeah. That is the biggest fall off, I think, for everybody. So then what do we do? Well, 2 points. 1, get them to show the hell up, and then 2, get them to give you the stuff, right? So when it comes to getting the stuff, we get an agreement that, yes, they want to go to the next step and have us take a look at what they're doing. From there, we book the next meeting 2 weeks out, so that it creates a bit of a deadline. And that's kind of average. Usually that's what it is. So I'll book the next meeting 2 weeks out. I'm going to reduce the ask to as few things as I need. So my email that I'm sending on that ask is, we can do the modeling with as little as, for me, it's a recent invoice and a benefit guide like you give a new employee. Because I figure even with some pushback from an HR person, they can source that themselves if they're wanting to. Or, hey, send me the benefit guide. Not a tough ask for them to get out of somebody. So with as little as, if you would like us to be more precise, you can also provide these things. We'll leave it up to you. And then it's a longer list, all the stuff. So I think minimizing the ask improves it. And then they're going to get a phone call and an email. Follow-ups are both. So they get a phone call and an email each time. And so if they agree, and then we got our meeting set out a week or 2 weeks rather, I'll say, I'll plan to reach out to you if I hadn't heard back from you already, or you hadn't sent the stuff in the next week or so. So, and they agree to that. So now I've got their permission to chase them and an agreement to meet. And that improves my outcomes. So where it gets me to about 50%. I haven't seen it get a whole lot better unless it's a streak that corrects later.
One of the things that I've seen on the progress meeting calls is most, not a blanket statement, but, and this is to me, possibly the biggest step outside of the weekly follow-up when they don't deliver, is they're not setting a meeting from a meeting. So
Right.
they're asking this for the stuff, saying that they'll send the email, but they don't set the next meeting on the phone before they get off it, which is to
Exactly.
me critical because it puts a sense of urgency and a timeline in their mind, their timeline. Because
Yep.
we'll ask them, you know, how long do you think it'll take you to put that together? I should have it sometime next week. Well, great. Let's set something up the following week. So you're
Exactly.
running it off of their timeline that way. And we were, even us, for a certain amount of time, we lost a lot of stuff that way.
Yep.
You know, so highly recommend that you're setting a meeting from a meeting, just to follow up on what you were saying. But I think that's the most crucial mistake that most of our clients make, really.
And it's for two reasons. One is the deadline, like we've already talked about. The other is some of them are going to agree to that because they don't want to say no. So I need to ask them to make that commitment of action to flush them out. If they then decline to do it and start to backpedal a little bit, I know this isn't a really strong prospect, but I didn't know before because I wasn't really demanding action, or requiring is a better way to say it. I wasn't requiring action. And then the third thought on that is I've had people that I'm working, kind of doing some team selling with. They don't have the stuff yet. They don't get a live conversation with the prospect. They cancel the second meeting. I think it's a big mistake. I'll show up to the second meeting. I'll do all the things that are on our best practices leading up to that second meeting, shooting, looking forward to, the reminder prior, shooting out the Zoom link 10 or 15 minutes prior. And I'll pull them back in so that if I need to, I can resell them on why I need that stuff. And a lot of times they'll log in and they'll apologize and say, can we kick this out a week? Or they see that it's coming and it hasn't been canceled off their calendar. They see that I'm confirming it. I'm building up a nice amount of pressure there. And they'll shoot me a message. Hey, obviously I didn't get you the stuff. Sorry, I had this other fire that popped up. Can we push it a week? Yes. How about this date and time? Now I'm much happier with that than a lot of the other outcome possibilities. So I keep those.
What do you think about a short 1-minute video ahead of an initial meeting explaining or setting expectations? I know that I'm seeing that more and more in other vendors that I'm dealing with. Yeah. And just, I don't know if you know anybody that's experimenting with that in our space, but I'm thinking about doing that myself.
Yeah, I like the idea of it. I would pilot it with you. It sounds like Tony's got the vendor. The other thing that I've seen that's positive that a couple people that we work with are doing is they'll send the invite and it'll have a little agenda in there. And it's just bullet points, but it attaches a number of minutes to each section. And it says intro, 5 introductions, 5 minutes, this 5 minutes, this 5 minutes, this 5 minutes for Q&A. So they're looking at it, they're like, okay, they're serious. It's not going to be, they're not telling me 20 minutes, it's going to be 60 minutes. Another one that one of our guys is doing that I think is helping his outcomes is that he, in the confirmation that goes out, he has a bio about who they're going to be meeting with. If I'm going to join him at a meeting, he's got his bio and my bio. If I'm not, he's got his bio, and just kind of preloads some credibility for those that may not go through the effort to go out to LinkedIn or just Google your name and look at your site and do all that. He's like, I'm going to make it easier. I'm just going to bring it right to him. And he's got a very well-written bio that's in that calendar event. And so I think that's a level of personalization and just credibility building that seems to be helping because he has a pretty solid hold rate. So you might add that in.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got one that I've used, a bio that I basically took my bio that you might have on the back of a book or something, and I squished it down under 100 words where it was pretty brief, but hit some high points. Anything else? Other thoughts, questions? All right. Well, I appreciate the time. As always, appreciate the partnership. And we'll get this out on recording for all the people that are playing hooky today that are tomorrow going to ask me why their CFO didn't show up. Have a great day.
Thank you.